Good morning and welcome to Youth Online. So first of all, before we kick off, well done to all of you who are involved in the youth invasion with the adults last week. I'm sure you should all give yourselves a good pat on the back because it was awesome. So, as today is the start of the first Sunday of the summer holidays, we're starting a new series, and this series is called Freestyle. So over the course of the summer, we're going to have all sorts of different people talking to you about all sorts of different topics. So I'm going to kick it off today, and we're going to be looking at one of the heroes of the Bible, Moses. And hopefully we're going to learn about perseverance from him. So what we're going to do to kick off is we're going to play a game called A Never Ending Story. So what I want you to do is, in the chat, is add your lines to the story as we go along, and hopefully it will all build up and be okay. So what you need to do is, I'm going to start off the story, and then you need to add a line, and each line needs to begin with and then you add your line to the story. So I'll start off with, once upon a time there was a man. So now if you add your ideas into the chat, and we'll add it into the story. And he went into the desert. Okay, so and the man's name was Kaleem, and then who was called Henry as well. And he fell into a hole. And then he found a snake which bit him. Okay, and then he decided to find his true love. And then okay, who was hiding? Okay, who's hiding with? But was a fox in the hole with the snake? And then he fell asleep. And then they decided they weren't the one. And he then got poisoned to death. But then he heard a voice, which was God. And God said, "Come out of the hole." And he came back to life. Okay, let's see if we can get a few more. Okay, and then he said, with the snake and the fox, and he tripped up before falling off a cliff. I've got a feeling, Oliver, you like having this person being in trouble. So he fell off a cliff and then fell back into the hole and banged his head while wearing a parachute. We've got an unfortunate guy here. Okay. And so at the bottom of the hole was shark-infested water, which broke. What did it break? Which broke into glass. And he managed to fix the parachute, but he took his sword and broke it again. Then the shark bit off his leg and killed the fox and stabbed the shark. And should we come into a landing? So let's have a positive ending to our story. The end. Cool. So, as many of you will know, Moses, switch back to me, so was a pretty important person in the Old Testament, ultimately leading his people, the Israelites, out of slavery in Egypt into the new land that God had promised them. There's a lot of detail about Moses in the Bible, but we're going to be focusing on certain parts of his life today. But Moses' life started with pretty humble beginnings, but this didn't stop him from being a person of influence. His parents were slaves in Egypt, and to make things worse, the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh, had passed a law saying that all Jewish babies or baby boys needed to be killed. So as a result, Moses' mum decided to break the law and kept him a secret until one day she hatched a plan to try and keep him safe, which we can read about in Exodus chapter 2, which says, so we're going to be looking at Exodus chapter 2 verses 1 to 10 to begin with, and it says, during this time a man from the tribe of Levi married a woman of his own tribe. She bore him a son. She saw that he was a fine boy, and she hid him for 3 months. But when she could not hide him any longer, she took a basket made of reeds and covered it with tar to make it watertight. She put a baby in it and placed it in the tall grass at the edge of the river. The baby's sister stood some distance away to see what would happen to him. The king's daughter came down to the river to bathe, while her servants walked along the bank. Suddenly she noticed the basket in the tall grass and sent a slave woman to get it. The princess opened it and saw it was a baby boy. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. "This is one of the Hebrew babies," she said. Then his sister asked her, "Shall I go and call a Hebrew woman to act as a wet nurse?" "Please do," she answered. So the girl went and brought the baby's own mother. The princess told the woman, "Take care of this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you." So she took the baby and nursed him. Later, when the child was old enough, she took him to the king's daughter, who adopted him as her own son. So we see there's a desperate situation which God turns into a fantastic opportunity. God uses Moses' mother's makeshift raft and turns it into a vessel which carried him into the next part of God's plan for him. And he found himself being adopted by the Pharaoh's daughter and growing up in the Pharaoh's palace. Throughout Moses' life, he travelled across the region, and so he travelled across the region. As you can see, this is the region that they were in, and I'm just going to give you a quick summary of some of his activities. So he started off, and he was born in Egypt to slave parents, as we just read, and spent his youth in the Pharaoh's court. He then accidentally killed an Egyptian guard, so he decided to flee to Midian. He spent 40 years there as a shepherd and had a dramatic encounter with God at the burning bush, which led to him returning back to Egypt. While he was in Egypt, he then led God's people out of slavery, as we will look at in a bit more detail later, and they went into an area called the Sinai Peninsula. And then from there, Moses went up Mount Sinai and received the law from God, including the 10 Commandments. He then spent 40 years leading the people of Israel through the wilderness towards the promised land that God had promised to him. But before they got to the promised land, he went up Mount Nebo and he appointed Joshua as his successor. And then Joshua was then the one who led the Israelites into the promised land. So one thing that Moses can definitely teach us is perseverance. So Moses was instructed by God that he would be leading his people out of slavery in Egypt. Although Moses was pretty reluctant to do this and to go and actually demand his people to be released. And as we're going to read in the next part, it didn't always go to plan. So the next part we're going to be reading is from Exodus 5 verses 1 to 9, which says, "Then Moses and Aaron went to the king of Egypt and said, "The Lord, the God of Israel says, let my people go so that they can hold a festival in the desert to honour me." "Who is the Lord?" the king demanded. "Why should I listen to him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." Moses and Aaron replied, "The God of the Hebrews has revealed himself to us. Allow us to travel for 3 days into the desert to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. If we do not go, he will kill us with disease or by war." The king said to Moses and Aaron, "What do you mean by making the people neglect their work? Get those slaves back to work. You people have become more numerous than the Egyptians, and now you want to stop working." That same day, the king commanded the Egyptian slave drivers and the Israelite foremen, "Stop giving the people straw for making bricks. Make them go and find it for themselves. But still require them to make the same number of bricks as they did before, not one less. They haven't had enough work to do, and that's why they're asking me to let them go and offer sacrifices to their God. Make these people work harder and keep them busy so they won't have time to listen to the pack of lies." So as we see here, Moses did go and talk to Pharaoh as God commanded him, but rather than Pharaoh accepting Moses' command and releasing them, which is what he hoped, he decides to ramp up the pressure on them and makes the workload on the Egyptians much worse than it was before. A move which I'm sure you would agree with would make Moses pretty unpopular and would have been a big blow to his confidence. Can you think of a time when you were really excited and summoned up lots of bravery and enthusiasm to do something, and then it went a bit wrong? If you feel brave, you may want to share that in the chat stream. If not, maybe just think about that. And I'm sure that everyone here has had a situation where they've been really excited to do something, they went out, but it didn't go quite the way that they planned. And then what I want you to think about is, how did you then react to that situation? Did you let that situation knock you down? Did it make you lose confidence? Or did it strengthen you to try again? So yeah, have a share in the chat stream if you can think of something like that. I'll give you a couple of moments to think about that, and then we'll move on to the next bit. Okay, cool. So Oliver's shared one. Does anyone else want to share something? So Moses didn't let this setback stop him. Afterwards, he turns to God and asks him why did he let it happen? Why God allowed Pharaoh to make the situation even worse than it was before. But God reaffirms his promises to him that he will bring Israel out of slavery in Egypt, and he tells him to go and try again. Then we see over the next couple of chapters of Exodus that there's 10 rounds of back and forth. Each time God tells Moses that what he intends to do and what will happen if the Pharaoh refuses. So each time Moses goes to Pharaoh, demands that he will set his people free or that there will be consequences. And as I'm sure you know, each of these consequences were some of the plagues. Can any of you remember what these plagues were? Yep, so there was locusts, famine, flies, yep. Can you think of any of the others? Death of babies, yep. Frogs, danger of death, yep. Yep, the Nile had been turned into blood. So the 10 plagues that we had, first of all, was the Nile being turned into blood. And what I didn't realise until I'd recently read a book is that all of these plagues that happened weren't at random. They weren't just God thinking of nasty things to happen, but they were actually directly attacking the gods of the Egyptians. So the Nile, which was seen as being the home of several of the Egyptian gods, was the first one to be attacked, and the Nile turned to blood, which caused everything in it to die. Then we had the plague of frogs, and frogs were seen as being one of the goddesses of fertility, so those coming in and causing a nuisance. Then, as you rightly said, we had lice and flies come in, which attacked the land, and this was attacking the god of earth and vegetation. Following that, we had literal swarms of flies coming in, which was attacking one of the Egyptian gods of creation and movement of the sun insects. Then we had the death of livestock, which was killing the gods of the bulls, the cows and the rams. Then we had skin complaints or boils, which was attacking the god of medicine. Then we had hail, thunder and fire, which was attacking the gods of the sky, the wind, well actually the two gods of the sky and of the wind. Then, as you said, we then had number 8, which is the locusts, which was attacking the gods of the crops and the gods of the fields and the protectors of the crops. Then number 9, we had darkness, and that was attacking the god of the sun and the god of sunrise and the god of light. And finally we had, as you said, the angel of death and the killing of the firstborns, which was attacking the god Pharaoh, which was seen as Pharaoh, which was seen as being a god within Egypt itself. So throughout all of this, God was being faithful to Moses. So every time he went to Moses and made a threat, God was still there and he carried out the threats that was being made. But even so, it still required a lot of perseverance by Moses. So thinking he had to go there 10 times in order to be able to do this before they saw anything happen. So obviously each time they went to Pharaoh, they said these things that can happen, and plagues happened, but the end result of what they wanted, being able to be set free, didn't happen until after the 10th one. So continuing to believe that God would keep his word through all of these cycles of rejection must have been pretty tough. It must have been tempted after the flies or after the boils or after the locusts to give up to the fact that Pharaoh was stubborn and wasn't going to give up or change his mind. But Moses trusted God enough to keep on listening and keep on trying throughout it all. We then finally see Moses' perseverance paying off in chapter 12 of Exodus. We're going to be looking at verses 31 to 41, which say, "That same night the king sent for Moses and Aaron and said, 'Get out, you and your Israelites. Leave my country and go and worship the Lord as you have asked. Take your sheep, goats and cattle and leave, and pray for a blessing on me.' The Egyptians urged the people to hurry and leave the country. They said, 'We will all be dead if you don't leave.' So the people filled their baking pans with unleavened dough, wrapped them in clothing and carried them on their shoulders. The Israelites had done as Moses had said, and he asked the Egyptians for gold and silver, jewellery and for clothing. The Lord made the Egyptians respect the people and give them what they asked for. In this way the Israelites carried away the wealth of the Egyptians. The Israelites sent out on foot from Ramesses for Succoth. There were about 600,000 men, not including women and children. A large number of other people, many sheep, goats and cattle, also went with them. They baked unleavened bread from the dough that they'd brought out of Egypt. For they had been driven out of Egypt so suddenly that they did not have time to get their food ready or for them to prepare leavened dough. The Israelites had lived in Egypt for 430 years. On the day the 430th year ended, all of the tribes of the Lord's people left Egypt. So just think about that. They had to wait 430 years for them to see the promise of God releasing his people to take into effect. And not only that, they had to go through 10 horrendous plagues before they finally got the green light to be able to leave Egypt. And this moment wouldn't have come if Moses hadn't kept on going despite all of the seemingly fruitless efforts that he had encountered along the way. Following the success in leading the Israelites out of Egypt, Moses, through God's power, then went on to do many great things. Can you remember any of the significant moments in Moses' life? If you can pop them into the chat stream. So anyone remember anything that happened? So chatting to a tree. Yeah, so we definitely had talking to a burning bush. Any others you can think of? Yeah, so we had God giving them the commandments. Yep, splitting the sea. That's quite a major achievement. Any others you can think of? Yeah. So some of the ones I came up with were, as you said, dividing the Red Sea to create a channel large enough for the entire nation of Israel to go through it. As you said, you've had the striking the rock on a staff, and from that fresh water pouring out, even though they were in the middle of the desert. We've had God providing manna or bread from heaven and quail or meat for the Israelites to eat while they were in the desert. God meeting with Moses on Sinai and giving them the 10 Commandments, as you said, and then being led through the desert by a pillar of cloud and during the day and a pillar of fire at night. So all of these things also happened during his life, but none of those things would have been able to happen if Moses hadn't stuck to his guns earlier on. So what I hope from this talk will encourage you that wherever you are right now, no matter how small the things that you might be doing might seem, that God has a plan for you, and we need to keep going even when it seems tough and when stuff doesn't seem to go going to plan, especially in this time of lockdown where there's so much uncertainty going on and we don't know what's going to be happening from one week to the next. It can be easy to lose hope. That we need to continue being the people who are carrying on trusting God and knowing that he's got a plan for all of these situations and that he can make good things happen through what's going on right now. So I just want to close in a prayer. So Lord God, we thank you what we have learnt from Moses today. We pray that you can make each one of us more like him in being able to not only listen to your word, but then having the bravery to follow it and keep on following it as you call us to. It may require us to have dedication and perseverance, and it may seem like there's no light at the end of the tunnel, but we pray that you help us to continue trusting you through all of it. And we know that you have a purpose for each one of our lives. So that's all I've got for you. If any of you would like to follow up, and if you have any prayer, be sure to hit the prayer button on the chat screen, and we've got a whole bunch of team who are ready and waiting to pray with you. If not, have a great week and we'll see you soon.